Buckle up. It's time for the Champions of Cinema podcast.
Welcome, sports fans, to the ultimate cinematic arena. I'm your host, Joe Walker, and this is the Champions of Cinema podcast. Fellow producer James Marshall and I are diving deep into the heart-pounding world of sports films, the victories, the defeats, and the unforgettable moments that make us cheer, cry, and believe in the power of the underdog.
Hello.
James, how you doing?
Great.
Buddy?
I'm good. I've just been in Derby now for 5 days.
Whoa, don't refer to it as Derby. You can't refer to it as Derby. That's against the rules.
Sorry, Barbados.
Sunny, beautiful Barbados.
The white sands of Barbados. And yeah, I'm enjoying it so far. It's pretty good.
What have you been watching recently, buddy?
Not a lot. Obviously, moving in took up a lot of time. But I did watch a film when I got back from a night out yesterday. I watched The Voyeurs with Sydney Sweeney with a friend yesterday. Don't watch it.
Is that about voyeurship of Sydney Sweeney?
No, it's not. It's about watching your neighbours fuck from across the street in a neighbouring apartment and getting off on that. So it's a bit weird.
Oh, what have I been watching? I'm still on the Penguin hype completely.
Sure, yeah. I'm just waiting for them to all be released, and then I'll just splurge it.
And currently, I'm delving into one of my other passions, which is period movies. I've talked about this before. I like anything that's set in the past, which is why today's movie is great. Mm-hmm. But I've been watching back the series called Wolf Hall on the BBC, which is about Henry VIII and his Chancellor, Thomas Cromwell. There was a whole lovely series. It was a 6-part miniseries about 10 years ago, and they've just coming out with the sequel next week.
Cool.
It's been 10 years in development.
Cool.
We've been waiting 10 years for the new series. Same actors, all that sort of jazz. I'm really excited for it. So I've been rewatching the old one so I can watch the new one when it comes out. So
that period piece will have to wait because we have another period piece we've got to do.
We do have another period piece. And this period piece today, it's not like we haven't had enough racing movies recently, James.
No.
We're just doing another one. Because if we know anything, Joe loves a racing movie. James is starting to like racing movies.
I love
and
racing
today, we're talking in particular about the 2019 movie Ford versus Ferrari. Man, James, by the end of today's episode, we might have a champion. Can you start me off with what is your haiku for this movie, just to get us off?
I quite like this one this week. I don't think it was as good as last week. Last week's was, I think, my best one yet.
Okay.
A lot of double entendres. This one's not so much, but... Engines, tires, and smoke. Modena versus Detroit. A legend is born.
I like Modena versus Detroit. I think that's a really nice...
The contrast. It's like Modena is this lovely, like, rural place in
Italy. Northern Italy. Beautiful northern Italy.
That's the rich part of Italy. It's pretty. Everyone's going out for coffees at 10 a.m. having a a sandwich and whatever. And Detroit is like it's the kind of the Florida's the armpit of America. What's Detroit? Detroit is
Florida's the groin of America because it's the Peebus, isn't it? In the shape of the.
Oh, I suppose, yeah. I thought because of the sweat, like the humidity, it was like the armpit, right? But the sweaty armpit of America. Yeah, okay, but yeah. Anyway, Detroit very different to Modena, and yet they're both birthplaces of cars. Let's say that both sides.
There is a certain amount of Ferrari being stylish, classic,
so different,
beautiful,
so different.
And Ford just being a sledgehammer.
Yeah.
Can we throw more horsepower at it?
And also mass-produced, sort of for the people. It's the Casio of cars, whereas Ferrari is the Rolex. It's the fine piece, which is only for
that's a really nice way of putting it. Quite a long movie. I think it ran just over 2 hours.
2.5.
2.5. Interestingly, the original cut by James Mangold was 4 hours long.
Wow.
I wonder how we could have an extra 90 minutes in this movie, but it does not feel like a 2.5-hour movie. It really flies by. It's got lots of interesting stuff going on. I'm going to actually start us off with a quiz.
Oh, let's do it.
I've got 4 questions for you today, and we're going to see what your knowledge is like. So, quiz question number 1. What did Carroll Shelby, one of our main characters in the movie, do before making cars and racing?
He was in the army, right?
He was. But what did he do outside of the army? What was his main business?
So between the army and cars, essentially, we're looking at. I can't remember. No, I don't know. Sorry.
He was a poultry farmer.
Chicken farmer.
He was a chicken farm.
Yeah, amazing.
Chicken farm.
Trying to make it sound spicy by using the word poultry, Joe. Love that.
I don't know how spicy poultry is, but fair enough. Okay, next question.
Poultry production coordinator, you should have said.
So Shelby's team replaces the rotors in the GT40 during the race. What would Ken Miles have called rotors in English parlance?
I think of rotors, I think of like anything that spins. Brake calipers?
Brake discs.
Brake discs. Okay.
Brake discs are what Americans would call a rotor.
Okay. You see that deduction I did there? That wasn't too bad.
It's almost like you've got a decent degree from a decent university. What does RPM stand for in the phrase 7,000 RPM?
Revolutions per minute.
Revolutions per minute is correct, yes. And what is the name of the machine that mixes air with fuel that has now been largely replaced by fuel injectors in cars?
I'm just thinking about all the buzzwords I've heard from Top Gear and stuff. Carburetor?
It is carburetor.
I think, yeah. I was thinking, I don't really hear about carburetors in modern times, so I'm assuming that's an old thing. There we go. Cool.
Nice. I like it. Well done.
Just thinking, Hammond, your carburetor's blown up.
Anyway, we need to move on to our 3-act plot, which is going to give us some interest into what this story is about, what this movie is about. And I'm going to start it off with Act 1, the kind of the setup act of our normal movies. So we open with Carroll Shelby winning the 1959 Le Mans 24-hour race and his subsequent exit from motor racing due to health issues. He's approached by Lee Iacocca from Ford with an idea to beat Ferrari in the Le Mans 24-hour after a failed merger and acquisition of the two brands. And Shelby is the only American to ever win at Le Mans. He is perfect as the head of a racing team. Shelby approaches Ken Miles, a talented but problematic English racing driver and mechanic, to help him develop a car, the stunning and beautiful GT40. At first, Miles' wife, Molly, isn't as supportive until she hears what the wages will be. Okay, so great sort of introduction to loads of amazing characters and lots of different people with lots of different sort of brands. Talk to me about Carroll Shelby.
Carroll Shelby is a charismatic, visionary car designer and former race driver with a unique ability to navigate both the technical and business sides of racing. He has a flair for leadership and a deep understanding of cars, which allows him to recognize and appreciate Miles's talents. Unlike Miles, Shelby knows how to maneuver within the corporate world and how to strike a balance between art and commerce.
True.
He is pragmatic yet passionate, often taking risks to protect Miles and push the boundaries of what Ford's executives will allow. Shelby's journey reflects his own need to balance passion and pragmatism and his loyalty to his friend and the sport.
So, I think that's a really, really good breakdown of who Carroll Shelby is.
It is so rare to find people who are able to find that balance. You get lots of people who are sort of one way of thinking. It's like Miles is thinking, we'll talk about him in a sec. We'll see that Miles is just thinking, how do I make this car go? Like, he's not thinking about, ROI and returns and budgets and things. It's like, but unfortunately, we see this in this, and that's where a lot of the conflict in this film is created. It's having to satisfy the business side of things and the corporate goals. It's that, and this is me now pulling out my my master's degree in business management. This is what we refer to as the principal agent problem, when it's kind of like the goals, the corporate goals from shareholders and top management don't align with the performance goals that Shelby and the racing team has.
Yes.
And it's trying to find that balance between there. It's very difficult.
This is really nice again, of this whole win on Sunday, sell on Monday. That's the point. This is the purpose of doing this. You win, you show off how great your cars are. People then want to buy their own little bit of that. And for Ferrari, that's almost impossible because, who's going to buy a Ferrari? Joe Blow off the street is not going to buy a Ferrari. But for Ford, if you make that blue oval be the winner of any race, anybody can go and buy their own Ford the next weekend. On that Monday after.
It was a great job by Ford because, rebranding for anyone is very difficult because, branding is something which is often created not by... It can be manipulated by a company or an organization, but ultimately the image is made inside the mind of the consumer. The consumer thinks of Ford as being, it's a utilitarian vehicle, it's for everyone. It's good, but it's not flashy, it's not exciting. And the whole point of this venture now into racing by Ford is to appeal to the younger audience. They're saying, look, there's now a young group of people now who are sort of the post-war babies who are now having money and want something exciting,
But not just that. It's the European audience. It's the world audience.
Yes, exactly.
That winning Le Mans is going to bring for them. Because if you think about it at the time, Ford in the 70s, they're dominating America. They're the biggest brand in America when it comes to cars, and they're dominating American sports as well. Within reason, NASCAR. It's easy for them to win NASCAR. It's fine. It's not a big thing. But if they can win Le Mans, then they become a brand that's respected in the way that Porsche and Ferrari and all these bigger names are respected
we see that happens, not just among, particularly from the peers, which they're trying to get respect from. We see in the start how Ferrari, really don't respect Ford at all, and they sort of spit in their face. I mean, we see the great Enzo Ferrari in this film. I loved him in this. I thought he was so good. It's like whenever he was on screen, it was just like, wow.
The tip of the hat, man.
The respect to Ken Miles at the end was fantastic.
Would you like to know a little fact about Shelby and his involvement with Ferrari?
Ooh, go on. Yeah.
So, in the late 50s, early 60s, Shelby actually went and spent a whole summer with Dino Ferrari, the son of Enzo Ferrari. And he spent a whole summer buying cars in Italy for somebody's private collection. That him and Dino Ferrari would drive around Italy, finding these beautiful cars, and then curating this collection of cars for the guy that he was working for. And he says, because Dino Ferrari died in
tragically,
the late 50s, early 60s, and he says that he believes that Enzo Ferrari was much more focused upon performance and racing and all of this sort of prestige, whereas if Dino had lived, Dino would have been much more focused on street cars and how the Ferrari name could have been the car for people to drive in the street rather than being a racing car.
That's really interesting.
So there's always these webs interwoven.
You've always got younger generations who think slightly differently. They're not necessarily looking at just doing the same thing that their dad did. They want to make a name for themselves. They want to try and challenge the status quo of maybe what their name, like we've mentioned, try and redefine yourself. Let's talk a bit about Ken then.
Yeah, let's talk about Ken. What information have you got for me about Ken, if you've got anything?
Yeah, so Ken Miles is a talented, fearless, and deeply passionate race driver and mechanic. Known for his sharp tongue and stubborn nature, he often clashes with authority, especially corporate figures who prioritize image over integrity. Miles is uncompromising in his dedication to racing and engineering, obsessively refining every detail to ensure his car's performance is flawless. Whilst his fiery personality can isolate him, his authenticity and love for the sport make him an endearing and ultimately sympathetic character. His journey reflects the tension between individual artistry and corporate control as he struggles to stay true to himself in a high-stakes, high-profile arena.
Really fair. Really, really fair. And I think
I love Ken. It's just like
he's well played by Christian Bale in this. He's really well played by Christian Bale.
This is one of the best performances we've seen in all the films we've done, I think.
He really dialed into what that character was about. His passions, his challenges, his internal conflicts. And the thing that's interesting about Ken Miles is, I think the movie makes him out to be a talented racing driver. James, this guy wasn't just talented; he was fucking amazing. All right, from 1958 to 1963, that's a 5-6 year period. He entered 44 races and won 38 of them in California.
Certain people in history just have what I'd call feel. It's kind of like it's sort of just you get it with like certain musicians, where certain guitarists, where it's just like it's not just technical skills. Like lots of people have technical skills. You know, if you learn to become an engineer, you know how this works and that works. But to have feel is to sort of see things in a different light to someone else.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
it's the natural ability to be in tune with your surroundings and understand that something's going to happen because you've had the experiential knowledge of things happening like that before. But also having a natural
It's just
affinity,
how your brain works. It's just kind of like his brain is like when he's in the car. It's almost like Neo in the Matrix. It's just like you're just you're seeing everything in a certain way that no one else can. It's just like this car is a living, breathing thing, and it's like he can feel that there's he's outsmarting these computers which they've installed into the Ford to try try and see the air resistance and aerodynamics. He can feel it just by driving. Like the front is lifting. It's kind of like this is heavy, that's heavy. Like, and Shelby's got a bit of that, and Shelby understands Ken. He's able to translate Ken's desires into sort of more attainable, realistic,
so true
possibility, which is why they play so well off each other.
They're contrasting, aren't they? They're two sides of the same coin. Ken's got his passion.
Savant. Yeah, he's just and
then Shelby has the ability to manipulate people and all those kinds of things. Absolutely. But I think that's the gorgeousness of this relationship is that they can't have success without each other. Mm-hmm. They can't. Exactly. They are simpatico. They need each other to be able to achieve the things that they can achieve. And I don't know if you've ever met people like that where you've had those relationships. I don't know if you've ever been around them. I've seen them. I might even have a couple of them myself, where I've been around people that I'm like, wow, I can't survive as a coach without maybe another coach around me, or I'm not going to achieve as a coach without having other coaches around me that I need to have around me. I've got passions and I've got understandings, but I haven't necessarily got some of the skills to navigate some of the things that I like to do. So
sure, Ken is a great X's and O's guy, but he alone couldn't run Shelby. He couldn't run, as in the company or the racing group. He needs Carroll Shelby, who's the kind of glue guy to kind of bring all the pieces together. Which is huge. So
he says that at one point to Miles, doesn't he? They're in the office together, and he says, "Do you understand how many times I've had to defend this? How many times this thing has nearly fallen apart?" Mm-hmm. He says, "You don't know any of that. You don't pay any attention to that. You just pay attention to the car. That's what you do." And
which is liberating. Right?
Absolutely. Because if they role reversed, I'm sure Shelby would have done fine with developing some elements of that car, but he doesn't necessarily know all of it. And Miles would have completely flamed out because he can't deal with the corporate types. Give us the second act of this movie, James.
So, Act 2. Mm-hmm. Shelby brings in British racer Ken Miles, a skilled but abrasive driver and mechanic with an unwavering commitment to perfection. Together, they design and test the GT40, Ford's revolutionary new race car. Miles and Shelby push the car and themselves to the breaking point, navigating challenges, setbacks, and Ford's corporate interference. Executives try to undermine Miles, worried about his difficult personality which might harm Ford's image, but Shelby fights to keep him in the driver's seat, knowing Miles' expertise is essential to their success. The GT40 finally shows promise as a fierce competitor, and Ford sets its sights on the 1966 Le Mans race.
I wanted to ask you a couple of times. I think, it's always interesting when we watch a racing movie, that is the car a character? Is there amount of character going on here? I think
so, it is. I love it because it's like, Do you know what it was? There's almost an echo of this film in real life. I think just last year when I think Chevrolet introduced like a souped up version of its like Camaro, and it raced at Le Mans. It wasn't part of a classification because so it was kind of like racing itself essentially, but it did really well. It was like lapping these hypercars and everything. Like it was ridiculous, you know. And that was kind of like a big moment that lots of Americans were sort of half joking about. Oh, you know, you Europeans, you know, we're beating you at your own thing here. You know, we've just taken this Camaro, we've we've customized it, and we've like, you know, shown that we, you know, can compete in this sphere. And it's kind of what the GT40 is. It's like this was a car which was made from scratch purely to compete with Europe, you know. And credit to Carroll Shelby and his resilience, as you mentioned, into selling this, you know, and to make Henry Ford II buy into this, and to see that this investment is worth it, and that if he can beat old man Ferrari at his own game, that's going to be incredible for redefining the image of Ford. And yeah, I mean, this car is great, and hence why it's been kind of reissued. I mean, in the early 2000s, they remade the Ford GT.
Yeah, they did. Yeah, they tried to do a bit of a reimagining of it. Yeah,
it was kind of similar, but they had to make it. It was a bit bigger, I think. I think Clarkson had one actually. He did have one, and it went wrong.
And it went terribly for
issues. Him, yeah. It was a pain to own because it had like a thing where like it would report itself to like Ford or something if it got stolen, but it wasn't stolen. It was on his driveway or something. So it was difficult to own. But clearly its historical significance warranted its reissue, and then obviously they brought it back again. I think a couple of years ago we saw it on Grand Tour. They did like a race to Niagara Falls, and that was like a much more upgraded one where they sort of essentially they were just using the branding of GT40 to release a supercar. You know, I mean,
because it's a bit like remaking the E-Type Jaguar or any number of classic cars. You know, the Fiat 500 is a remake of the old classic car. You know, because people have got nostalgia that is attached to those vehicles, that because they love them so much, they're just like, I've always wanted one. You know, the old version isn't that good because it doesn't have all the mod cons. It doesn't have a modern radio. It's not very comfortable. But you know, I want the modern version of it, and then I can enjoy that. And I think that that can be massively successful. And that's like, it's a bit like, you know, rebooting a movie franchise, or reboot. You know, I want Rocky for the noughties. You know, all those kinds of things.
But because when I grew up on like, I think when you were young, you either choose like cars, trains, or dinosaurs to be hyper obsessed about when you're like 8 years old. And I think I was cars, you know, and I remember I had for my 8th birthday, I had a Scalextric set, and I had a few different cars, and one of them was a Ford GT. I think it was a Ford GT. So it wasn't the GT40, it was the sort of reissued 2000s version.
The reissued one?
Yeah.
Fair enough, that's understandable.
No, yeah, because it was just blue, I think. I don't think it had like the racing numbers and stuff on it. It didn't look like a race car, it looked like a street car. But still, like, it was cool to have. And I think I had a Ferrari Le Mans car as well, actually, from that period. I don't know if it was the same one, but it was cool. And
it's interesting how, because of a 17-year age gap, that all of my obsessive cars are ones that are from, you know, the 60s, 70s, and 80s.
Sure, yeah.
And yours are like around the turn of the century.
Sure.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Okay. I haven't got a lot of like stats about the GT40. I think there's loads of stats in the movie. I think if you're interested in going and looking at what the engine displacement was, and you know the fact that it was called the GT40 because it was 40 inches high, and all those kinds of things. It's a cool car. At the time, it was interesting. It was really developed highly. The fact that the GT40 went under further development after this into what's known as the J car, and it looks a lot more like the P3 actually as it went forward. It went a little bit less blocky and a little bit more flowy, which is pretty cool. But I do think that the fact that the movie centers so much around the car is really cool. I think we said this in pre-production, But the only thing I would love even more is Ken Miles sort of pleading with the car a little bit and talking to it as if it's a living, breathing animal. I think that would be the only thing I would have loved a little bit more of. You know, we've seen that so often in movies. We've seen it in Days of Thunder. We've seen it in lots of things that we've done. That maybe it's just seen as a bit of an overdone trope. I'm not sure.
I think Ken was really in touch, I think, with like racing in general and the art of racing, and thinking about when to change gear and like how to race well, and the timing of when do you really send it on a car, because these aren't durable cars, especially in Le Mans. These are long races. You have to kind of almost like running a race, like a marathon. It's like you have to save your energy and your sort of body's. You have to keep in mind your body's limitations and spend it at the right time to make it across to win. And it's sort of the same with these cars at this point. I mean, nowadays cars are so reliable, it's less of an issue. But back then, it's really like, if you really push the car for too long, it's going to blow.
I think that's still the case now, because you still get that with F1 cars. You still get that with
that's a good point. Yeah,
NASCARs. A lot of those engines are torn down and rebuilt. Quite soon after their uses, or they get they're generally going to last for between 6 and 8 races. But if you think about 6 and 8 races in Formula One, time-wise, is similar to a 24-hour. This is an endurance race, isn't it? It's a test of endurance and reliability more than anything else. And we're going to talk about that just after this next section. So our third act is after the failure of the 1965 race and retirement, Miles and Shelby, after a tussle, double down on the work to make the GT40 the car necessary to win Le Mans. And we get a montage. Brilliant. Ken barely survives a crash during testing, which identifies an issue with a brake degradation, which team come up with a novel idea to resolve. Ford executives look to replace Miles in the car, but Shelby doubles down and promises Ford that if Shelby doesn't win the Daytona 24-hour race, that he will give Ford the Shelby company. Shelby takes the risk on the engine, and they win, and the stage is set for the Le Mans 24-hour. At the fateful race, apart from a poor start, Miles fights back against the Ferraris. Using a mixture of focus, passion, and ingenuity, the Shelby Ford team find themselves in the lead, only for the executives to request a photo op of the 3 Fords finishing together, which ultimately costs Miles the win and the Triple Crown. After the race, Shelby and Miles go to work on the next iteration of the GT40, the J car. In testing, Miles crashes and is killed instantly. 6 months later, Shelby visits Peter and Molly Miles, but he isn't sure how to approach them. Bumping into Peter, the two share a moment where we see the importance of Shelby's friendship with Ken, and Shelby heads off into the sunset and the credits roll. It's a big section of the movie. It's got a lot going on.
I'm glad, and it should do. I think it would have been a real letdown. I think if this race was like cut really short.
It's a long section.
It's a full-fledged experience. Lots of things going on. The arguing with the officials about what replacing the parts and
stealing the Ferrari's stopwatch,
stuff like that. Yeah,
yeah, it's all really fun. There's loads of fun bits in this. Interestingly, do you know where they filmed this Le Mans sequence?
In Europe? Must have been somewhere in Europe, right?
No. Well, they did a little bit of shooting. So they shot some of the track to be used as backgrounds of the Monson Straight, but it was actually filmed in 5 different locations across America, properly, like Georgia, and then here, and then there. And what they did was they then said, right, so we're doing this. We're on this part of the race, which is this lap, and it's at this time of day, so we need to film at this time of day. And then what they did was they stitched together all these different sections, areas of the track.
You have to essentially do like a storyboard of what this race looks like, and then give themselves a list of like, okay, we need this section, this section, this section. And they said, right, we'll film this here, do that there.
Yeah, just like but if you imagine what they did was they filmed
Frankenstein everything together,
Frankenstein it all together, and make the cars look progressively more dirty as the day goes on.
They did
and
a
then
very good job.
Reset all the cars, and then do it all again in a new location.
Because
it was amazing.
Seamless. Was there any CGI?
Because you can't tell. Lots of CGI. And in particular, around the pits. No, I don't think the cars were as much as I think there's some the backgrounds though, especially at the pits at Le Mans, where you're seeing opposite the pits and there's the big grandstand. All of that CGI. The actual pits they built to make them look like the 1960s pits at Le Mans, and they spent a lot of time doing that. But that's part of the reason why, James, the budget for this movie was $97.6 million.
Yeah,
it's quite an expensive one. But doesn't mean that it wasn't successful, because it made $225 million in its production. So it did pretty well. Interestingly, Le Mans has just celebrated 101 years since its inception as a race, and a test of endurance. So the question for you is, do you think as a test of endurance and reliability, it's the most important single race in the world?
Ooh, I mean, I'd say it's the biggest race in the world in that it combines so many different elements. Because I think of endurance, I think of like Dakar,
Yes, that's a good one.
That's a really tough one, because you're going over like horrible terrain. It's multiple days and stuff. Even rallying as well. You've got like time trials and checkpoints you've got to make and stuff. But it's something like Dakar, speed is a bit less important. I don't know. I feel like this is like, it's iconic because it combines everything, I suppose, in one. And the fact that it's multiple drivers means that you can drive as fast as you can basically drive at sort of F1 pace or intensity, if that makes sense, before then having to change over, take a break, have a nap, and then dive back in again. But
so the longest you're allowed to race in the Le Mans is 4 hours. So you can do a 4-hour stint, and then you've got to come out. So generally, it's a pair of racers who would do the races that's going on.
I guess because it's only a once a year thing, it doesn't have the same sort of gravitas as like F1, because we hear about F1 names all the time, and because F1 is so common, it sort of has that commercial kind of touring aspect, because like every 2 weeks there's a race in a new location, whereas Le Mans is Le Mans. It's like there are other endurance races, but Le Mans is the race.
Yeah, and we often talk about my father for some reason on this podcast, but he went to a Le Mans 24-hour with a classic racing team just before he passed away. In the couple of years before he passed away, he was in the crew. He was, but more because he was in a wheelchair at this point, so he was there purely as support, for this team.
Cool. But he was in the team,
so he had his jacket on, he was in the pit. Yeah,
that's sweet.
And it was a company called 22 GT Racing. They're based in Derby, and they do a lot of like Aston Martin restoration and stuff. So they took their Aston Martin DB, they took their DB4 lightweight to the classic Le Mans, and he went along to do that. And I think he had a really awesome time. But yeah, I think it's an interesting race, and it's a really cool setting for sort of the final part of this, and it's a bit of payoff for Miles to go. We get some natural disappointment that Miles doesn't win as the way we were supposed to. Ultimately, it all comes round that, those Ford executives that have been the foil at Shelby's back for the whole movie ultimately cost Miles the real release that we want, and that is him winning the Sebring 12 hours, the Daytona 24, and then the Le Mans 24 as well, which is kind of disappointing, really, which is a shame.
Yeah. But at the same time, I think it brought out a really poignant athlete moment, because I think a lot of this film is kind of like, sometimes it's maybe a challenge. It's not like necessarily as straightforward of a sports movie as other films we've done. But like the big thing for me, and which is why Ken was my favorite character, is that he was, when he was first told he wouldn't be going to Le Mans, for the 65 race, he didn't make a fuss. He still wanted to make sure the car was as ready as it can be. And even when he got cheated at the end of Le Mans with that technicality, he wasn't overly bitter. He was grateful for the ride, and he was already thinking about the improvements for the car. He thought this kid was like a kid for him. And it's like, for me, like, upon reflection, it was like, it can be really hard in sports to be sidelined, especially when you feel like you deserve to be taking part. When you've worked harder than others, you've contributed more than others. And in Miles's case, the reason was actually strictly personal. It wasn't even because of his performance. It was because,
his face didn't fit, really.
His face didn't fit, and also Ford were concerned more about, we want to have all the Ford cars in a row to have that a really memorable photo that shows that, this is our turf now. They weren't really thinking about, let's let Ken win in a normal way. Mm-hmm. And there are two, when those situations happen to you, there are sort of two ways you can react to that information in sports in general. You can sulk, you can make a fuss, and from my experience, that's I've done that sometimes, where it's sort of, you feel like, why am I now getting less time? It's like you feel entitled almost a lot of the time as an athlete. But alternatively, and particularly this is like a team sport in the sense that you've got your other drivers in your team, and you've got to think about, what does the team do? He keeps buying in, and it's kind of like, that's a really powerful, the ability to do that and to have that mental toughness is a really powerful tool, I think. And it's kind of like, those are the best people to be around. And it's like, I think about what makes teams successful, every team has some stars in it, because stars are easy to get. You can buy stars if you have good draft picks, or development things. You find diamonds everywhere. But the things I think that make teams really special are those glue guys, which don't get enough praise. They don't get a lot of praise. They're not in the limelight. They're not getting pictures taken of them. They're not on the news all the time. But it's those guys which keep working, keep buying in, and that, regardless of their treatment, they work hard as they can. They're showing that they're proving people wrong all the time, and those are the ones which quietly create the successes for teams. They're sort of doing thankless tasks, and I think that's kind of what Ken was doing. Either, maybe not necessarily, his motivation wasn't necessarily the success for Ford, but the success of this car, and doing, even if I don't get the opportunity to maybe get in the seat, or if I do get in the seat, I don't have the opportunity to win and make my own picture huge. 100%. To see, like, what's the best thing for this car that I've spent so much time and energy towards. I just think that was really profound, and I just feel like it takes a lot from a man to do that, and to have this story told, which shows, Ken's passion for the car. And, I think if he hadn't tragically died a year after this race, he could have probably been one of the all-time great drivers. But I feel like history has sort of done dirty a bit. So I think it was really
age was sort of against him at this point. He died at 47. So he was kind of a bit older than a lot of the other racers. But yes, there is that moment where the movie allows us to see that he puts the team before his own goals and his own desire, which is really always his bigger problem that is earlier in the story. So there's a lovely resolution to his problems are he's got all of these things, and there's within reason. That's also a little bit of what we get from Shelby. Shelby's kind of problem sometimes is he wants to be a bit of a people pleaser and he wants to make it all work, but he comes to Ken's defense again and again in this final third of the movie to put up your whole company to the Ford. He says it to Ford when he takes him out in the car.
If he wins Daytona, he gets to be in the car, and if he loses, doesn't matter if he's second place and drives a great race. I'll give you Shelby.
I'll give you my business.
Is that real? Is that real? Is that documented?
I don't know, but I think it's beautiful as a way of saying how much he believes in Ken. Yeah. I think that's awesome. And he even, you can see it in that scene with at Daytona where you're like, he's got the chance. He's like, I can't push the engine too much because it's going to blow up. And eventually, he just sort of he sees that the other teams are conspiring against him. The Ford company's kind of conspiring against him. they've got the F1 pit crew and all this or NASCAR pit crew and all this kind of stuff. And he just goes and writes on the chalkboard, 7,000 plus, just go like hell and give it to us. We're shit or bust here. I think that's the, we're going to have it or we're not going to have it. And I think that's awesome. It makes it's a really beautiful moment to enjoy. But I think what happens is we see Ken paying him back after for that trust by giving him his trust back. And what's so fantastic about this is we see quite a lot of conflict between the two over the course of the movie because they're both passionate about it. They both want to be successful. And then when they do have this success, he apologizes to him. I'm sorry that this happened. And Ken's just immediately thinking, don't worry about it. We'll get on with the next car. This is possibly just one of the most beautiful movies that I've ever watched in multiple senses, right? It's got...
Yeah. No, we're not at that point. We're not at that point yet. But
but you're good. I like it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to touch on a few things, but yeah, that's a really good point. So I think we're getting dual hero's journey or dual voyage and return kind of journeys happening here. What would you say is the journey that's going on? Do you have
the journey is self-resilience and backing yourself in the face of adversity, even from those who are supposed to be your supporters in the big Ford Motor Company. And it's sort of that. It's about maintaining integrity and self-belief, and it's like they were so sure of themselves that they were willing to risk it all to get the GT40, and even when they did succeed, it was still their successes were still sort of hijacked by corporate Ford. You will see all the congratulations go to the to BB being like, oh, well done, you must be so proud. We had a plan in place and we did all these things, and what were you really doing? You were slowing things down, if anything, So,
do you want me to spoil the ending a little bit for you?
Go on,
just a tiny little bit. So the winning car with Bruce McLaren in, who obviously was the person who then produced the McLaren car, and the McLaren racing team.
Yeah.
Who do you think that team, his car was owned by?
BB? No, what do you mean? So
Shelby
owned.
Had two.
Shelby had
cars. Both had the number 1 and number 2 car in the race. Oh. So you can imagine him coming down and being like, oh, "I'm sorry, Ken," but at the same time, we were like, "Woo!" It doesn't matter because my car still won. The third car was another Ford, but run by another company.
Okay.
But both the McLaren and the Miles car were both Shelby cars, and you're sort of like, oh,
but Ford, but whichever you name as your number 1 is generally the one which if you had to decide is the one that you want to succeed, right? You see that in F1, they have 2 cars. Yeah. The number 1 is the one where if you have to pick one or the other, you prioritize the one. Okay,
so we often talk about whether or not they win or why they win, and they don't. So it's I think we've found, and I'm willing to say, James, that as we are going through these movies and in our search for the champions of cinema, a lot of the time, the champions, the best movies are the ones where they haven't won.
Mm-hmm.
We always like to look at this as part of our episodes. It's one of our favourite sections of the podcast, and it's the sequelizer and or prequelizer, James.
Mm-hmm.
And the one that I've got for you this week, this is my pitch, and it's only about 3 lines. I want the Carroll Shelby biography. I want pre-racing. I want pre-racing. I want war. I want post-war. I want racing. I want a little bit of touching on this, and then I want post-racing car development over the course of his life. Give me a young Shelby, a middle-aged Shelby with a reprisal of the role by Matt Damon, and then an older Shelby as well. Because I think his life is just top-notch and amazing. Unfortunately, we can't do much about Miles, through things like this, but I think that's the only way we'd get a great sequel out of this movie.
I agree. Yeah, I agree with that. It's hard to do sequelizers with true stories, especially when some characters are departed from the living world. So,
Is this about casual viewing, or is it about groundbreaking and life-changing revelations, which would make it more arty?
I think it is that. I think it's not common that we have those times where we see that conflict between, business and sort of function, and just like, look, okay, this isn't going to be so special. Like, we're just trying to show that we can be a bit more eccentric and sell sportier cars. But what Ken and Shelby are trying to do is they're trying to create the best possible machine. And it's like having that odds is like, those sort of frictions are everywhere in life. It's sort of people don't share your passion. They sort of see things like, well, that's like, you need to do all that. Like, do we need Ken? Like, can we not just get some driver who's not going to give us HR problems? Like,
you've just covered all of my revelations that I was going to come up with in this element, and I want to just share my revelations with you as I wrote them down. Friendships that are important to us aren't always easy, but they are worth working for. Yeah, that was a revelation that came out.
That's huge. It's like, I feel like a lot of my best friendships are ones where I've had friction with them. We've been shouting at each other and we've been mad, but then it's kind of like, if you didn't care about that person, then you just sort of cut them off, and you wouldn't. Whereas actually, you argue with that person, and because you care about them, and you want to
fight for the relationship, right?
Fight for the relationship. See things through their way, have them see things your way, rather than just saying, right, you're annoying me, I'm going to cut you off. So yeah, that's huge. Yeah,
having a passion and being true to it is the secret to happiness and fulfillment. Ken is so passionate. I said, I think seeing Ken Miles happy testing the next car moments before his death is great. You can almost, do you know how that's like he died doing what he loved?
Yeah.
It's the perfect example of that, and you see it. Because he leaves the sunglasses, his son puts the sunglasses on, and he's driving around the track, and he's just smiling and enjoying it, and he's like, yeah, okay, let's do, and then he just loses it.
It'd be a lot worse if it's just like, he's just a mechanic who's got to test this car, but it's just like a 9 to 5. It's like, okay, we got to make sure this car's ready for Le Mans 67. And, oh no, it's spun off. Whereas this is like, he loves doing what he does. It doesn't really feel like work to him. It's like, and
you're lucky if you get there.
And you know what ties in perfectly? It's that quote from Shelby's in his speech early in the film, where it's like, they say that if you do what you love, you never work a day in your life. But some people do something because they have to do it. And it's like they have like this kind of external drive, which is like, this is why they're put on this planet. And it's like, it's not even a question of like, do I want to do it or not? It's like, this is me. This is how
I have to do.
This is what I have to do. This is my purpose. And I think that was
interestingly that scene's really beautiful, because Ken sees it and he sees Shelby talking to him, and I think Shelby is talking to him. But then he says, and the other person, I'm like that, and the other person that's like that is Henry Ford. Because he realizes he's got to give that, he's got to sell, hasn't he? He's got to sell stuff.
So good.
Which nicely brings us around to my third point, is that corporate people will always be out for themselves and their interests, or the interests of the business. Yeah. The resolve of Shelby on multiple occasions to defend Miles and support Miles is incredible. I just thought, there's a number of times when he could have just thrown Miles under the bus, or just said, do you know what, Ken, you're going to be a test driver for us, you're going to work in the team, but you're just never going to race the car. And he goes to bat for him, and I think that's really important. Sometimes you have to support people.
Business is rarely sentimental, if ever. Whereas personal relationships and personal decisions are almost always sentimental. Like, you're willing to sacrifice things, you're willing to make compromises because you care for a person and their feelings, and you're sympathetic towards them, so you're willing to do certain things. Whereas business is pretty cold-hearted at the end of the day, and you can almost sympathize with the decisions made by Ford, because everything that they do, their decisions are business driven. They're thinking, well, we don't want Ken because he's a HR nightmare. We want the 3 cars to be in a line because that supports Ford's image. It doesn't really matter if we give Ken the special win, because it's like, so what? You know, it's like we're thinking about future plans. We're thinking about the bigger picture. So it's I'm not saying that I like what Ford did, but it's kind of rational what they did from their point of view, because they've got shareholders to satisfy. They need to make, well, how is this going to improve our stock price? How is this going to improve car sales? You know, that's their bottom line. You know, they're not they're not sentimental.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And it's kind of sad when we always want our stories to be sentimental. We always want our experiences in these movies to be sentimental. But the truth and honesty is that everything has to make money in sport. Even now, you know, sport and entertainment are hand in hand. They are reliant upon each other. If sport didn't have the money, it wouldn't have the sport, the people playing the sport that we need. So I think, you know, to be a champion, you also have to understand how the dollars and cents go hand in hand with the success on and off the field. And sometimes that's forgotten about, I think, in some of the stuff that we do. You know, you have to have the sponsors, you have to make the corporate people happy, and that's quite an important thing. James, did you enjoy this one?
It was the best racing film I've seen.
Oh, well,
yeah.
There we go. I don't think you can get much better than that.
And you know what? This is like a film, like, you can see yourself rewatching it because it's got so many good bits to it, and it being a historical film, it's kind of like you want to kind of pay respect to the history and the significance of this film. So
I feel like I'm back on track with providing you with.
You did well, Joe. You did well after the disaster that was Kingpin. You did well.
No, hardly a disaster. But
no, not
I think
disaster. Wrong word.
I think we're able to find. I think what we're doing is we're cultivating a decent way of looking at movies. Sometimes we get moments, and sometimes we get movies, and this one is an entire movie of perfection.
Sometimes it's just like, from our point of view as a sports movie podcast, it's like we're looking for that one trope, and how well does this film show that trope? And in some ways, I feel like the trope that we've talked about in this film, with the whole synergistic X's and O's guy versus people guy, the balance between performance and corporate compliance, like, this is almost like the best film which does this, really.
Yeah.
And it's like,
so far, definitely.
There's no story which does this better, which is why it's such a good story.
It is excellent. Give me a rating, James.
It's a champion for me. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think this is possibly the champion of and don't get me wrong, it's because it's been so well put together. It's got the right.
We're talking about
It's got the right cast.
Mm-hmm.
It's got the right story.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a fantastic director. It's got a really good. You know, it does well with the music. It does well with the visuals. It just hits every level of what you're looking for in a perfect movie. It's
covering perhaps the most famous story from the most famous race. I could argue the most famous race in motor racing. So
very possibly,
I think the Indianapolis 500 maybe, but like the Indianapolis 500 is simply the summit of a racing circuit, right? It's the pinnacle.
I'm just going to say this now.
Yeah.
Give me 25 to 30 years time. We're going to get a Lewis Hamilton movie where it's about the race with Verstappen where Lewis loses.
The one where it's like the final lap.
No, Michael, this is not
right. No, this is not right. Yeah, they could make a film about that.
That's all movie worthy.
We were in the pub together for that. I think
we were,
because it's just like, this is insane. Like, this is
like, can't do this.
This is like a movie.
James, we've come to the end of the episode. I think we've covered everything that we need to cover in Ford versus Ferrari. I'm very grateful. Great to come out of the first of season 2's champions. I think is
absolutely
a great place to be. If you are wanting to follow us more on any of our social media, you can follow us at
Champions of Cinema.
And if you want to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, if you want to send us an email, if you want to tell us what movies are completely off our radar and Joe doesn't know anything he's on about, and you think we should be watching a movie that you think is a champion of cinema, you can tell us at
championsofcinema@gmail.com.
James, you continue to pay your rent and doing your job. Well done. I'm not going to replace you with a new host, a new,
with a more HR compliant driver. I mean, podcast host, co-host.
Yes. well, you know, I'm trying to get us off the ground with you know, sponsorships by all these different companies, but they just, you know, what they say is, oh, you know, Marshall's just.
I've got a radio face.
We're gonna watch a movie next week with one of our favourite characters of all time. You know, and it's not going to be one where it's like, you know, fighting people in the ring. Because it's going to be over the top. A lovely 80s movie about arm wrestling. I think it's the only arm wrestling movie that's ever been made. Incredible. And I think you're going to be like, what is this rubbish, Joe? But just, it's Stallone, it's arm wrestling, and it is going to be an absolute
lots of baby oil.
Banger.
More baby oil than a Diddy party.
Let's, well, I'm glad you enjoyed that, James. And I think I'm going to hit the music and say thanks very much to this one. And thank you for producing the podcast with me. Much appreciated.
Of course, Joe. Anytime.
Thanks, James. Bye.
Goodbye. Bye-bye.